Well, in the last few moments, Christian, John Kirby, the White House National Security Council spokesman, has been speaking in the White House. He didn't really give any clues as to what Joe Biden was thinking and what he might do next, other than to say that he will act, he said, in his own schedule and in our own time. But there is no doubt that the events of the weekend pose a very significant immediate challenge for Joe Biden. Does he respond to the killing of these three US servicemen by going after the Iranian proxy groups directly themselves to try and contain it to them, as we've seen the US do in the past? Or does he now decide that enough is enough and now it is time to attack the source of these attacks, i.e. Iran itself? Risk, therefore, Tehran retaliating and this whole thing spiralling, igniting into a far more dangerous conflict in the Middle East. That's the calculation that Joe Biden is trying to weigh up now as he's huddled together today on two separate occasions with his national security team. One other bit of information that's come out today as to how this attack happened in the first place, why that drone was not intercepted by the US base. And US officials have said it's because at exactly the same time the militant drone was coming in, a US drone was returning to the base at the same time, and therefore the militant drone, they say, was not seen. However it happened, it did. Three US servicemen are now dead, and the Middle East is bracing for the US response.
We lost 3 brave souls in an attack on one of our bases.
Yes.
I'd ask you for a moment of silence for all 3 of those fallen souls.
The killing of American soldiers in the Middle East is the moment Joe Biden had been dreading. But the president is unequivocal about the next step.
We shall respond.
The question for Biden now is how he responds and whether that retaliation brings about an escalation in the region with Iran that he's been so desperate to avoid. Since the Hamas attack on October the 7th, the conflict has steadily escalated across the region. Israel has exchanged strikes with the Iran-backed militia Hezbollah across the Lebanese border. And Houthi rebels in Yemen, also allied with Iran, have targeted commercial and military ships in the Red Sea. And in response, the US and UK have hit Houthi military targets there. While other Iran-backed groups have launched over 150 attacks on US bases in Iraq and Syria. But yesterday's strike on US base Tower 22 in Jordan marks the first time US personnel have been directly killed in the escalating conflict. The US has thousands of troops stationed in the Middle East, it claims, as a deterrent, mostly against the resurgence of the Islamic State. And the White House insisted today it wasn't looking to up the ante with Iran.
We don't seek a war with Iran. We're not looking for a wider conflict in the Middle East. In fact, every action the president has taken has been designed to de-escalate, to try to bring the tensions down. And obviously this attack, very, very serious, certainly escalatory on the behalf of these militia groups. We have to take that seriously, and we will. But I'm not going to get ahead of the president's decision space one way or the other.
This blood is on this administration's hands.
Biden says he doesn't want to escalate, yet in an election year, nor does he want to be accused of being soft on America's enemies, especially Iran, as hawks on the right are only too keen to remind him.
They end every statement of we're going to defend ourselves, but we don't want this thing to spread. And what Iran hears from that is, well, let's take it to the next level and see what we can get away with next time. And now we have 3 dead service members because of it.
Given these strikes in Jordan, what should or what do you think America will do next?
I think striking Shia-based militants in Iraq and Syria is almost a certainty that you're going to see that in retaliation. The real question is whether or not the U.S. is going to decide that at this point, this is all about Iran, and that you're going to have to see either covertly or overtly strikes and efforts against Iran directly in a way that we really haven't seen yet.
Isn't it also true that the crux of the matter is the war in Gaza? If the US were to address that more forcibly with Israel. Is that not getting to the actual heart of the problem?
I'm skeptical that just because the U.S. is able to compel a ceasefire, which I, by the way, don't think it can, that it's going to end the broader challenge. The reality is this is about Iran and Iran's role in the region and wanting to have a dominant voice in the region and not being deterred right now.
If that's President Biden's calculation too, that the time to address the threat of Iran directly is now, then America and the world is about to be dragged ever deeper into this conflict.
Well, earlier I spoke to the retired US general and former Supreme Allied Commander of NATO, Wesley Clark. I asked him what action he thinks the US should now take.
In a crisis like this, you have to take the initiative away from the enemy. What I would call it is you have to establish escalation dominance. You keep apologizing for escalating, they keep hitting. So you got to hit back so hard that they say, okay, we've had enough, we're not going to strike back again. And that means you must go to the source. And the source is Iran. So you have to pick out the targets in Iran that will dissuade the Revolutionary Guards and the Ayatollahs from continuing this campaign.
So that does mean that you're talking about strikes in Iran itself, on Iranian territory.
That's right.
Yeah.
That would be, if I were in the chain of command, that's what I'd be recommending, because the tit for tat doesn't work. And we know that historically. We saw this when I was a young officer in Vietnam. Tit for tat doesn't work. You want to make a difference, you must use decisive force. Take out these small outposts. Take them out. Don't strike once. Go back again and again. But you must also go to the source, and that source is Iran. The Iranian government is in deep trouble. Most of the people don't want it there, but they can't get rid of it. So I keep hearing from my Iranian friends, send the B-52s in. Now, we're not going to send any B-52s in, I don't think. But this is a time where the United States has to establish its escalation dominance over Iran.
Right. And how do you factor in American domestic politics here? Because you have Donald Trump saying President Biden is leading you into World War III and saying none of this would have happened had he been president. How does that change the calculation as to what to do?
Well, I think that it's inevitable that there will be some effort on the part of politicians to make some domestic hay out of this. But I think statesmen have to rise above the domestic politics. And I think this is a case where President Biden has to choose what's right for the country. And you know, you have to be careful how you read this, because when I talk to Muslim Americans in the United States and Iranian Americans, what they're looking for from the president is strength. They're not looking for compromise. They know what the Iranian government's about. They know what its intent is. So they're looking to see a president who exhibits strength. It hasn't happened in Ukraine, and that started the slide. Really, Afghanistan did, and then Ukraine. And so what they see is an American administration which doesn't respond with the full force which it's capable. And they attribute it to timidity. They're looking for strong leadership. So I think the domestic politics of this are that the president will come out better politically at home and abroad if he responds more strongly.
Isn't the other way to stop this, though, to stop the war in Gaza? You know, you stop that war in Gaza, you stop the Houthi attacks on shipping, you stop these Iranian-backed attacks. That's the key to it all, isn't it?
Well, I'm not sure that's a safe assumption. I think you could stop the war in Gaza. You'd still have these attacks. You still have interference in shipping whenever Iran wants to do it. The war in Gaza is a convenient excuse for Iran to continue a long-term campaign to drive the United States out and to establish itself as a regional hegemon. And so I think we have to be careful. Although it's popular in the press to pull all this together, in fact, it's entirely different. For Israel, what's happening in Gaza is an existential threat. Israel cannot continue business as usual with Hamas embedded in tunnels with weapons being built there and supplied and continuing to attack Israel. Britain couldn't do it. You wouldn't have it if a group of people were in the Shetland Islands continuing to lob mortars into Scotland. You wouldn't accept it. And neither will Israel. And there's still the problem of Hezbollah in the north. So I think you have to keep these two problems separate. Israel needs to deal with Gaza. If it can deal with it in a more humanitarian way, that's fine. And they're trying, I believe. The United States has to deal with the situation in Iran. And the two are trying to be linked, but actually are distinct.
General Clark, thank you very much indeed.
Thank you.
Well, I then spoke to Syed Mohammed Marandi, who's a professor at the University of Tehran. And I began by asking what he thinks would happen if the United States took that kind of military action against Iran.
It would bring down the global economy because Iranian military forces will respond decisively against American military bases across the region and in the Persian Gulf in particular. And those regimes in the Persian Gulf that host US bases would be seen as hostile, and therefore their key oil and gas infrastructure would be not out of bounds.
And so the question of retaliation is there's no doubt in your mind, because General Clark argues that, you know, the government in Tehran is not popular with the whole population, and that a decisive military strike might make it stop and pause and say, no, this is where we back off.
I think when Trump murdered the Iranian general who led the fight against ISIS and Al-Qaeda in Syria and Iraq, ISIS and Al-Qaeda, which the Americans and their allies helped create, when the United States murdered him, we saw the millions of people in Tehran go to his funeral. I think the Americans should not believe their own propaganda.
What is Iran's strategy? Is it trying to say, unless you stop the bombing in Gaza, all of this is going to get worse?
That's not an Iranian strategy. That's clear as day to everyone. The United States likes to think, or likes to pretend, and your government likes to pretend, that everyone in this region is an Iranian proxy. Yemen is an Iranian proxy. Lebanon is an Iranian proxy. Hamas is an Iranian proxy. Iraqi is if that's the case, then we are the superpower, not the United States.
But all of those structures do get support from Iran, don't they? You know, there are Iranian Revolutionary Guard in Syria. You send weapons to the Houthis. It's clear that there are clear lines. So I'm just trying to work out what is the strategy to stop Israel, or what is the current Iranian government strategy?
As long as this continues, the situation is going to get worse. And have no doubt that the United States will not win this battle.
Do you think we are now on the road to a big escalation and, I mean, really a world war?
I don't think the United States is that stupid to launch an attack on Iran, because it will destroy the world economy. And the United States is already losing the war in Ukraine, and in its competition with China, it's not doing well at all. This is not a war that the Americans can win. It will definitely lose.
I mean, that's very interesting, because it's exactly what General Clark said is the Iranian view, that as long as they think America won't attack them with full force, they will carry on doing what they're doing. And you're sort of illustrating that point.
Have no doubt, Iran is fully prepared for an American strike. But the United States will feel the consequences immediately. Iran is not Yemen. Iran is not Iraq. Iran is not Syria, and it's not Hamas. It's not even Vietnam. The United States would be making the greatest miscalculation of the 21st century and the 20th century combined.
Mr. Marandi, thank you very much indeed.
Thank you.